Welcome to the Dead Pixel Society podcast, the photo imaging industry's leading news source. Here's your host, Gary Peugeot. The Dead Pixel Society podcast is brought to you by Mediaclip, Advertech Printing, and Independent Photo Imagers.
Hello again and welcome to the Dead Pixel Society podcast. I'm your host, Gary Peugeot, and today we're joined by Philippa Games, who is with Websites That Win, and she's got decades of experience in marketing and consulting and will advise us on how we can get the most out of our website. Hey, Philippa, how are you today?
Hey, Gary, good morning or good afternoon.
Tell us how you got started in this career, because as we were talking about in the preamble, you do have an accent, but you're actually coming to us from Santa Cruz. So it sounds like you have a long and varied history in the business world.
Yeah, I actually, as I came over to the States, I've been actually, I'm going to date myself here, but working in the internet since basically it started being a major business tool, which was coincident pretty much with when I arrived in the US. Sure. And I just thought it was fascinating. I had a background in, communications, data and so on, but I just thought that the possibilities of what it could do, sure, even back then were absolutely amazing and wanted to get involved in it.
So what was the first thing you did in the early internet? Was it, because I remember things like FTP and crazy things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So in fact, I mean, when I first came here, I was working for a major national nonprofit based in Chicago. So, this was early days. And in the early days, there were, so you probably remember this too, there were things like CompuServe and AOL, and they had,
absolutely,
like bulletin boards, which were early forms of discussion groups, right?
Yeah.
And what this nonprofit wanted to do, so it was a national nonprofit that had a chapter based in every state, and they wanted all their chapters to communicate using this new technology, right, and email and bulletin board, or whatever kind of group chat there was back then. And I was actually brought on. They created a position for me, specifically for me, because it was nothing like they'd ever had before, to evangelize to the chapter people to work this way, because it was really new to everybody. And it was fascinating, actually, because there were the early adopters who loved it, and there were the over my dead body people. And amazingly, there were over my dead body people, and they wanted to continue sending faxes around the place. And of course, every time you send a fax, you pretty much have to do it on an individual one-by-one basis, right? Because you've got to call the phone number and fax it. And of course, if you don't get everybody doing it, so you're like, okay, we've got 45 people we can chat to in our group, and then we've got to send out 5 faxes. It doesn't work. So it was quite an interesting challenge. Yeah. I mean, it was much less about the technology and much more about people handling,
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, I remember back, again, I'm dating myself, back in the days in the photo industry, there was the photo forum on CompuServe, and that was a big deal. Right, because that's where all the news and everything, and we were heavily involved in it back then. And boy, you really brought back memories with faxing, because we used to do in the organization I used to work with, the Photo Marketing Association, we had a print newsletter, and we got into fax broadcasts, and that was just like, a sea change. Then of course we went to email and web and all that stuff. So I'm very familiar with the pain points of getting audiences to move to new places when it makes more sense.
And if you look at how far we've come, I mean, I was just, now I have clients in Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, because it doesn't really matter anymore where you are. Right. You can do anything, online. You can talk to anybody anywhere in the world who's got a connection, and it's a whole different. I mean, with COVID, if you think about it, the way that we handled COVID, and we all went online and met online and socially for personal reasons, for professional reasons, etc. Even if COVID had happened even 5 years earlier, we wouldn't have had that technology.
Right.
To the same extent. It's amazing, really.
Well, we would have been trying to do it on Skype, and that would have been terrible.
Right. Yes.
Skype is terrible.
Yes.
But yeah, no, it is interesting, because I have thought about that too, because it was sort of the perfect storm of technology coming together at a time where it was most needed, for remote work and those kind of things, because, people had laptops, whereas, like you said, 5 years before, there were probably more desktops than laptops, right? And you had tablets, and, a lot of people didn't have fast enough internet connections at home to do video conferencing and things. So you're exactly right. And it is interesting how, markets and people have adapted to kind of the pause that COVID gave them. I mean, think about some of the businesses that you frequent that are now doing home delivery or food
Right.
delivery or some of these things, which were always kind of there, but because they had an impetus to, hey, we need to get this done and make it work, now it's mainstream. People are still doing it.
Right. Yeah.
So tell us about websites, because websites are kind of your thing, right? So in our industry, the photo industry, there's a lot of websites. So there's basically two ways people interact. Well, three ways if you count brick and mortar, where people interact. There's apps, and then there's websites, and then there's websites that behave like apps. So there's sort of, and we're really one of the weirdest industries in the sense that people create on our platforms, right? They upload pictures and create and manufacture products essentially, right? You put up a picture and then you make something out of it, right? So there's a lot of user interaction. It's not like a one-click purchase environment, except for like cameras and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some ways people can really start to assess the effectiveness of their website?
Right. So yeah, my thing is using analytics, website analytics, to figure that out, to figure out what do I need to do better, or what can I do differently that will improve things. They're probably saying, oh no, maybe I should tune out now because this is going to be incredibly boring, because it can be overwhelming.
Right.
And you see a load of data and charts and graphs and you don't know where to start.
Right.
And the point is to really understand your own business and what you're trying to do with it. In terms of your website. So the really key question is, what do you want people to do when they come to your site?
Right.
So do you want them to upload pictures? Do you want them to call you? Do you want them to sign up for your newsletter? Is there something that you're actually selling on your website, right? Do you have a free consultation or a paid consultation, right? That you want people. So that's the way to get into it. It's not just looking at the numbers thinking, oh, I wonder what this means. It's what do I think should be happening?
Right.
And is it happening enough? Well, which is kind of how long is a piece of string? But, this is the point of the analytics. If you don't have questions that are related to your business and your specific goals, it's really hard. Like I said, I mean, I think Google Analytics right now has about at least 140 odd default reports. I mean, there's no way that you can just get into them.
With the websites that most people in our industry have, they are doing shopping carts and transactions and things like that. But, I think a lot of them are still, maybe missing some connections in terms of how to get people to actually go through the process, right? Whether it's a UI hiccup or a connectivity issue or something, because that's where we see a lot of challenges is people start making something and then they abandon it. Is there any suggestions you have in the sort of that kind of scenario?
Yeah. So one of the things that you can do, and I mean, shopping carts are interesting because you still see very high levels of people putting things into shopping carts and then not completing the transaction. But even if it's not a shopping cart, one of the things that you can typically do with analytics is to look at the places where people drop off. So people start some sort of process and then you can see, well, where do they stop? And then the key thing, which is why I love this, is because they're not going to tell you why. You don't know why. Right. But that's obviously the key question. So sometimes it can be obvious, like something isn't working. Okay. Or sometimes it's a question like, have you got some sort of a form that is way too long?
Right.
Yesterday, I was talking with a new client, and he's got this contact form, which is for an initial contact. It's in a very specific niche business. And so there's a very specific reason why somebody would want to contact him, but he's asking them to upload photos and, examples or documentation or whatever. And I'm going, hold on, that's quite a complicated thing to do. If this is our initial contact, maybe that's not something you want me to do immediately. You can have a note field that says, what's your specific issue, right? Where they can just write something. And with analytics, there's ways we can test that because we can tell when somebody starts to fill in a form, for example. So if we've got a lead form, we can tell if somebody starts to fill it in. And then obviously we can then correlate that with the number of actual forms that get submitted.
Right.
And if it's not a good number, then potentially, as I said, one of the things that I start to look for is the form just too long, or does it ask things that are too complicated, like upload something
Mhm.
as an initial, once you've got the relationship going and it's obvious that you need, like you just asked me to send you my headshot,
Mhm.
right? I'll
Right.
send you my headshot because I've got a good reason to send it to you now.
Right. Yeah.
If the first thing we'd ever, like the very first thing you'd said to me is send me your headshot, I might have gone, right?
It's funny. It is interesting because you do see that in a lot of places where it's like, create an account and they do say, hey, put in your headshot, which I don't
Right,
understand why, but I
right,
have seen that.
right,
Unless they're expecting you to have an ongoing relationship with them to, add content, add reviews, or add something like that, I can see that. Yeah. But if it's just, I'm making some prints, do I really need that sort of environment?
right. But the nice thing is the proof of the pudding. I mean, basically, you have to come up with a theory, and then you obviously test it. So the next thing that will happen is he's going to shorten the form and ask basic things that he needs for the initial lead,
Mhm.
and we'll see if we get a better response.
Right.
Now, obviously, it's a bit more complicated than that because one of the other things you want to know is, are the people that I'm attracting to my website the right people
Correct.
for what I'm trying to sell, or what I'm doing here? Because if you've got thousands of visitors who are really not the right target audience, doesn't make any difference. They're not going to
Right.
interact with you. Okay.
Mhm.
And so one of the other things that we can do, where you start seeing people drop off or people aren't completing things in the way you'd want, you can start saying, well, are there some patterns in who those people are or how they came here?
Right.
An example of that is social media advertising. I
Right.
have to say that even though lots and lots of people jump into social media advertising, it tends to be a bit cheaper than, say, Google pay-per-click ads, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But typically on social media, people aren't searching for products and services and things to help them solve their problems. They're
Right.
mostly there to, chat with friends, get entertained, etc.,
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
they might see an ad that sort of catches their eye, looks interesting. Oh, I'll just click that quickly, take one look. No, this is really not what I want to do right now. And they're
Right.
gone,
Right.
right? So one of the other things we can do with analytics that can be very helpful is to chunk visitors down into how they got to your site.
Right.
If they did a search, I know you had an SEO guest you said quite recently.
Mhm.
So if people come to you from a Google search or a search engine, where they've put in a search that brings them to your website, then obviously it's a much better lead or a potential visitor because they're
Exactly.
proactively looking for what you're doing,
Right.
what you're offering.
Mhm.
Right. Whereas a social media ad person is somebody who's just sort of off clicking on
They're
something
clicking
without,
around.
yeah.
There may not be an intent there.
And
Right.
that's not always the case. Obviously, some people find social media very, very helpful. And I'm not trying to knock social media, but what I am
Mhm.
saying is that it's absolutely worth doing that kind of review to see
Mhm.
what kind, the way that you get traffic to your site, and of the different ways that you're doing that. Your email list should be generating you some very high quality visitors,
Right.
right? Because they've already said they're interested in hearing from you again.
Right.
But just noticing and because this is also affecting your marketing budgets,
Sure.
right? So where is what you're spending on marketing the most effective, and where is it really not? Even if it's cheap, if it's just bringing you a load of people who click away immediately, is it really worth doing?
So, what are some of the numbers that you suggest people take an initial look at? Because, like you said, there's dozens of them, right? I mean, I don't know if bounce rate is the number, or if you can ascertain who if they're bots, which is a big problem now. So what are some of the things that you suggest just as initial look through if you're not even a web expert?
Yeah, it's a question I often get asked, and I actually honestly push back on it. Well, because there are so many numbers, like I said, I said, I really think you need to be thinking about your own business and what you need to know right now, because
Sure.
another thing is, don't look at numbers for the sake of it, right? You really only should be looking at a number if you intend to do something about it,
Right.
if you can figure something to do about it. So it's much more valuable to you to think about, what are the key questions right now? I mean, for example, if you're suspecting that people are adding a lot of stuff to shopping carts and then never going through with it,
Mhm.
maybe that's where you want to start,
Right.
right?
Right.
If you're spending a lot of money on ads and you feel like you're not getting the traction, maybe that's where you want to start, because you want to see you really want to know which kind of advertising is, or SEO or whatever, is effective, as I said, or not. So instead of just looking at numbers for the sake of it, you really, to me, it makes much more sense if you're asking questions about what you know you're already doing. For example, this client that I just talked about, he's a brand new client, right? So we have some work to do, and he knows that. But for example, he's selling a very specific product on his site. As I said, it's a very niche. I don't really necessarily want to tell you exactly the detail, but
No, that's fine. Perfect.
But the product that he's selling is something that would pertain to almost all of us who've ever driven a car.
Okay.
It has to do with getting a ticket. And yet the technical name for it is known to him because he's in that line of work. And that's the navigation link on his website to the page that describes this service.
Right.
But you and me, assuming you're not an ex-traffic cop, probably have no idea what it means. I didn't. And I sort of asked a load of friends after I talked to him, and I said, because the fact of the matter is that page, we can tell from the analytics, has got, since we put analytics on his site about a month ago, 0 visitors, 0 clicks. Because nobody, if you look at the words that he's using to describe it, it means nothing to me. I have absolutely no idea why I should click on it or what it would do for me.
Right. Because it's a technical sort of inside industry term as opposed to a general knowledge term.
And we all have jargon in our industry. I'm sure in the photography industry, there's a load of jargon. Right?
Well, it's interesting you say it because, right when we're recording this is the fourth quarter of the holiday season. It's going to probably, we'll probably post this after the first of the year. But and they always talk about photo gift, right? This is the gifting season. But the reality is because of the way you can now put photos and personal content on all kinds of things, including wall decor and drinkware and, plates and everything else. It's not just for gifts, but it seems like the industry is kind of focused on gifts. And I've always wondered if that was an opportunity the industry has is to, find another term, which I don't know what that is. If I did, I'd share. But so is there a way people can test that? I guess that was my question is that aware, when people run into that issue, how do they find the right words?
Well, actually, I said, describe it. Tell me what this actually is. And when he did that, we came up easily. I mean, if you tell me in lay terms that I can understand. We easily came up with how we can do that differently. Plus, on the homepage, see, he also didn't really have it explained on the homepage.
Right.
And right now, it's the one thing that he wants to sell.
Right.
So on the homepage, there should be a thing that says, hey, if this is happening to you, you need this. Boom.
Right.
Click here. So, and that's something just to really, stress that point, because I see it again and again. If you're in a business where you're using a lot of terminology, it's really important to think about, do the people that you want to interact with you understand those words? And if not, you need to talk to them in words that they understand. Because otherwise, and this is why analytics is so helpful.
Right.
Because without those analytics, I wouldn't have been able to say to him, you have had 0 people even seeing the page that describes this.
He was probably shocked by that, right?
He was, absolutely, yes.
Interesting. Because you've raised an interesting point, especially for the photography industry, because especially in the hardware side of the business, there's a lot of jargon, right? For different types of cameras and technical specifications on lenses and all these things. And, I've been in the industry a long time and I don't know what some of these things are or why they're important, right? So I think you've raised a really good point that, for the benefit, not just for your customers, but of your business, you should look at starting to use more language that is more customer friendly.
Right. Now, if your customers, I don't know, say you're selling very high spec equipment to professional photographers.
Right.
Maybe you can do that, right? Because maybe they'll be looking for those professional terms.
Right.
But that's the real issue, is how do your visitors describe what they think you have? Now, if you have a search engine on your website, that can be a gold mine.
Right.
Because because another thing that analytics can tell you is, what do people type into that search engine that's on your site? So we're not talking about Google now, we're talking about your site. Right. The search engine. And what people type in there obviously is what they think you have in their terms. And that can be really, really helpful in understanding how they think about what you do. Another thing it's really helpful for is that I've used with several clients is if they're looking for things that you don't currently provide, but are within your area of expertise,
Right.
then there's market research about what else you could develop, right? And we've actually, with several clients, I mean, we've actually done that, gone ahead and developed new products or services that have been very successful based on that what comes out of that search engine.
That's an interesting point because, back in the day when people mostly shop physically, in brick and mortar environment, people would walk in, they would say, do you have X, Y, or Z? And the retailer would say, well, no, but we've got this thing that's kind of like that, but that's feedback they're getting, right? And then when things moved on to the internet, they've lost that unless they have their own way to capture that, an internal search engine or something like that. They have no way of assessing what people might want.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey, creative. Are you ready to discuss profits, the money, the ways to make it happen? The Profitable Creative Podcast is for you. The creative, how you define it. Videographers, photographers, entrepreneurs, marketing agencies, you get it. CEO of Core Group and author Christian Brim interviews industry experts, creative entrepreneurs, and professionals alike who strive to be creative and make money at the same time. Sound like you? Tune in now. It's time for profit.
I know, and that, one of the things that I really hate, I do it. Obviously, part of analytics is also looking at the user experience. You talked about things that frustrate people and so on. If you put in a search on somebody's website and it comes back and says, sorry, we haven't got that, then it says, no results found, something like that. Please try your search again with different keywords or something like that. And what is that bad? Because it makes it like it's my fault.
Right.
That I couldn't find it. Right. I mean, that salesperson in the physical store wouldn't say, you stupid person, why are you asking for that? Right?
Could you rephrase that in another way? Do more work for me to find out what it is I want from you. So what would be a way people could respond? Let's say, for example, somebody goes on to a camera website and they put in, I want, this lens, and you don't have that lens. Would you have, we don't have that, but we have this? I mean,
you could, or you could literally have a contact form there. Hey, send us an idea of what you're looking for, or just fill this in brief form or something. I mean, I have had a client that built a sort of synonym table.
Right.
This was in the electrical, it was manufacturing parts kinds of things. But one of the things we found from looking at their search engine was that people often misspelled part names. And again, I don't know if this happens in photography, because if you have a lot of complicated parts.
Canon, people they misspell Canon all the time.
Right. And they also they would update parts and sort of rename them or give them a different number or something. And people had the old number and their search engine was saying, sorry, that's out of stock or that's obsolete.
Right.
Without saying, but the part you need is this. Right. So they actually did create a sort of a lookup table. I mean, it's a bit more complicated, but it obviously can be done, right?
Right.
That maps what people put in to this is what you actually need, right? And because people were leaving their site because they were getting these searches and the search engine was saying, sorry, we haven't got it.
Right.
When that actually wasn't true.
Right. They had it, but
the person had spelt it wrong or didn't know the right number anymore or that kind of thing. And of course, then people were leaving their site and going to the competition. And when we made that change, then obviously that resolved a lot of those issues.
What kind of results can people expect? Because, I mean, first of all, it doesn't happen overnight, right? When someone starts looking at this stuff, it takes a while for the data to accrue and for trends to be shown and all this. So, is there like a percentage increase that people can say are attributable to paying attention to the analytics? Is there a 10% lift, a 15%? Is there an industry number, I guess, is the question.
I think that's how long of it is a piece of, I think that's so dependent on what it is. I mean, look, if you've got a broken link and you fix the link, that can change things overnight. I mean, it can change things immediately, right?
Right.
If you are asking too many questions and you take out the questions that annoy people, that can make a pretty quick difference. It depends on the nature of the problem. And it depends on all sorts of other things like how in demand the problem is. I mean, obviously, if it's a high ticket item anyway, people don't necessarily buy that as an impulse buy. There are lots of different factors that go into how things work out. And I actually have to say, so Google Analytics, which is the tool I normally use, has actually brought in some industry benchmarking. So if you say what industry you're in, it will give you sort of typical, because people love that, right? Like how many visitors am I getting? Is that typical for the industry? I push back on that, honestly. And I think a lot of people whose expertise I respect do as well, because when you're looking at benchmarking against other companies, you don't always know if you're comparing apples with apples, because you don't know what those other companies are doing in terms of effective marketing. You don't know how effective their websites are.
It's just one piece of it.
I mean, you could say, right, I'm getting fewer visitors than the industry average, but maybe my website is doing a fantastic job of conversion because I've got great content and I really make my case. Mm-hmm. So the fact that I'm getting fewer visitors, I'm still getting more business because I've got a higher conversion rate. Right. So I personally much prefer to advise clients to benchmark against themselves. You know, when you start doing serious evaluation of your website performance, you know, take some measurements, right? And then set some goals. And in 3 months' time, where are we? Right.
So what are some examples of how people can use analytics to make a real life difference? We've talked about forms, we've talked about some things. There's a lot of interest in video. Does video actually help?
Yeah. So one of the things you can do with analytics that a lot of people don't realize is that you can see not only how many people started the video, but you can see how many people watched it all the way through. So you can set your analytics to tell you when people have seen half of it. It depends obviously how long it is, right? 75%, etc. And actually, when you look at those analytics in depth, they can actually be quite frightening some of the time. I mean, I have a client he's prolific. I mean, every day he's got several videos that come out in his area of expertise. And we looked at some of the viewing statistics, and he was losing, and this is not untypical, 50% of his visitors or people who started watching the video dropped off in the first 30 seconds.
Wow. It was a waste of time then, for the most part.
Well, before we started recording, you said to me, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time at the beginning of the podcast going blah, 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 because people want to get into it. They want to go, okay, is this going to be fun to listen to? Is it going to be valuable? What am I going to get? Right. Let's go. They've heard you before. They're used to who you are, etc. Right. One of the things he did do was a lot of blah, blah, blah at the beginning. And I tried to convince him that he really shouldn't, because look at all these people dropping off. And by 1 minute, he'd lost 90%. I mean, that's ridiculous, right? Yeah.
And if he's doing multiple a day, he's probably driving people away.
But well, no, he is very successful. But you know, but I do see a lot of businesses, and especially visitors. I mean, this is kind of the video that we're sort of Zoom kind of thing that we're doing now. But you know, there are businesses that do some highly expensive, highly produced videos to promote the business. Right. And then you look at their viewing stats, and they're rubbish. And that's a problem. I mean, that's really not good news, right? So you and the same for podcasts. You can also tell how many people listen to the podcast and how much of the podcast they consume. Right. So it's really helpful information.
Speaking of information, where can people go to get more information on what you do, and they can learn more?
So my website is called websitesthatwin.com. And on that website, you can find a free ebook which has 5 stories. I think it's called 5 Hidden Gems, and it has 5 stories from my experience of things that different clients, different businesses have found in their analytics that we absolutely couldn't have otherwise known, and changes that we made to the business or to the website based on what we found that made a big difference. And there's no charts, graphs, or techie language in it. So, you know, my goal is really to help business owners understand the power of doing this, without getting into all the technology, because you can find somebody to do that for you. But the point is, as a business owner, you need to know what's in it for you to do this properly. Right. So that's available at my website, and it's hopefully designed to inspire people to say, maybe something like that could be happening for me. And the other thing is, I'm on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only person in the entire planet with my name, which is kind of helpful. It easy. So, and I'm very happy to connect with people on LinkedIn.
Awesome. So the website again is websitesthatwin.com/ebook. Now, is there a 15 field form and a picture you have to upload to get that, or how quick is that? Well, I guess people should go there and find out, right? That's what we're going
Right.
to do.
You do
Tell
have
people
to put
go
in
there
your
and
name
find
and
out.
your email because, it's free. And of course, that means that I do like to know who you are and try and have a conversation with you afterwards. But if you
You don't
say
need a
go away, I'll
bio.
go
You don't need to
away.
set up a profile.
No,
It's-
no, 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 no. No.
So you practice what you preach, is what I'm trying to get at.
Right. And if people don't want to hear from me ever again, they can say so and I'll go away. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, it's so nice to meet you. Thank you so much. I think you shared some great information and look forward to seeing more from you in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you for listening to the Dead Pixel Society podcast. Read more great stories and sign up for the newsletter at www.thedeadpixelssociety.com.